I used to think I was prepared for any emergency. The army had built me that way. The woman who could walk into a room full of confusion, scan 100 moving pieces, and know exactly what needed to happen next. As a logistics officer, I'd spent years planning for situations where one mistake could ripple out and cost dozens of people something they couldn't get back. Fuel shortages, equipment failures, last-minute changes nobody saw coming. I learned how to stay still on the inside while everyone else was scrambling. Nothing in that training prepared me for a hospital chair beside my 2-year-old's bed, watching a monitor trace the rhythm of her heart, and understanding for the first time that some problems don't care about checklists. I can still call up the smell of that hallway, disinfectant, burnt coffee from the machine by the nurse's station, and a particular kind of quiet that only exists in children's hospitals. Every parent in that wing was performing the same quiet magic trick, pretending not to be terrified. I was one of them. Emma lay under a thin blue blanket, her hand resting near the 4 taped into her skin, and for a few seconds she looked so peaceful I let myself believe we were fine. Then the monitor gave a small sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to remind me my daughter's body was fighting something she was too young to understand. I reached over and folded her fingers into mine. "Mommy's here," I whispered with no idea if she could hear me, needing to say it anyway. It was the only promise I had left to give. I had spent my whole adult life protecting people. My soldiers, my family, everyone who leaned on me to have the answer. Standing there next to Emma, I felt something I almost never let myself feel. Helpless. 3 days earlier, my biggest worry had been getting through what I thought was an ordinary week. Mark and I had been married 6 years, and from the outside we probably looked like we had it figured out. A military wife, a successful husband, a beautiful little girl, a house that looked like proof we knew what we were doing. But marriages don't usually collapse in one dramatic moment. Most of the time they go quiet first. A conversation avoided. An odd excuse. A feeling you notice and talk yourself out of. I'd noticed things. Small things. Mark had gotten protective of his phone. Financial emails started arriving that he never mentioned. When I asked about bills, he answered a beat too fast. "Don't worry about it. I handled it. It's nothing." Those were his favorite phrases, and because I trusted him, I let them be enough. Maybe that was the mistake. I was trained to interrogate problems at work, but at home I wanted badly to believe the man sleeping next to me every night. The first sign that something was wrong with Emma came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. She'd been more tired than usual, and I told myself that was nothing. Kids get fevers, kids have bad days. But when I lifted her out of her crib, the quiet in her hit me before anything else did. This was a child who could turn an empty room into chaos in 5 minutes flat, who loved dancing, who grabbed my army ID off my uniform every chance she got and asked, "Mommy, work?" That morning she just rested her head on my shoulder and said nothing, and something in me understood before I had a reason to. A mother's instinct doesn't always come with an explanation. Sometimes it just arrives. I called the pediatrician. Within hours we were in one office, then another, the questions getting heavier each time, until we landed at the children's hospital and a pediatric cardiologist told us Emma had a congenital heart condition that needed immediate attention, a procedure that couldn't wait. Did what I always do when things get hard. I focused, I took notes, I held on to details. But one sentence wouldn't let go of me. There will be an immediate out-of-pocket cost before we can move forward. $5,500. It wasn't an impossible number. We had savings, we'd always been careful, or so I thought. I watched Emma's chest rise and fall after the doctor left, and $5,500 stopped being money and became a deadline. The exact distance between waiting and helping my daughter. I opened our bank account expecting to see what I always saw. Instead, the number on the screen made me stop breathing for a second. I refreshed it. Checked again. Same number. Almost nothing. The account we'd spent years building was gutted, and I sat there so long the screen went dark, telling myself it had to be an error. A delayed transaction, a glitch, anything but the thing I wasn't ready to consider. Called Mark. He picked up on the third ring, voice too casual. "Hey, what's going on?" "Mark. Where is the money from our savings account?" A pause, not confused, careful. "I moved some things around." "What does that mean?" "It means I invested it." I looked at Emma, asleep, unaware that the 2 adults responsible for her were suddenly standing on opposite sides of something. "You invested our emergency savings?" "Rebecca, calm down. That line bothered me more than anything he'd said yet. Not the words, the tone underneath them, like my concern was the inconvenience. Emma needs the procedure, Mark. I know. We need the money. It will be there. When? Another pause. Soon. What did you do? Something shifted in his voice, small but unmistakable. I made a smart decision for our future. Our daughter needs heart surgery, and you're talking about the future? She isn't having surgery this second. Something cold moved through me. Not anger yet, something worse. A realization. Did you use our savings for something else? You're making this bigger than it is. That was the moment it shifted for good. Because I knew this man, or thought I did, and for the first time I heard what was actually sitting behind his words. Not concern. Not fear. Defensiveness. That night, once Emma was finally asleep, I sat in the dim hospital room with my laptop and started pulling threads I couldn't put back down. Our accounts, our credit reports, our statements. Transfers I didn't recognize. Payments I'd never approved. Accounts tied to our information that I had no memory of opening. At first I told myself I was just scared and tired seeing problems that weren't there. But the longer I looked, the more there was to find. Missing statements, unexplained withdrawals, decisions made in a life I didn't know I was living. It felt like discovering a room inside my own house I'd never noticed before, and realizing someone else had been living in it. Around midnight, Mark called. You need to stop looking through things. What? You heard me. Why are you telling me that? Because you're making yourself crazy. I stared at the evidence glowing on my screen. Mark, what are you hiding? Silence. Then, you don't trust me anymore? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because he'd somehow turned the question back on me. I was the one sitting beside our sick daughter. I was the one hunting for money to save her. And somehow I was the one on trial. I need honesty from you, I said quietly. We'll talk when things calm down. Then he hung up. The next morning I kept searching. Not because I wanted to find something terrible, but because I needed to know the truth. And that's when I found the document. Buried in a folder of financial records. A property closing statement dated 3 days before Emma was admitted. I read it once, twice, a third time because my brain refused to accept it. Purchase amount. Transaction details. A property address. A beach house. Mark hadn't shuffled our savings into some harmless investment. He'd spent the money we needed for our daughter on a vacation home. And one detail stopped me cold. The buyer's name had been partially obscured, but I could still make out enough letters to know this wasn't a stranger. This was someone close. Someone I had trusted completely. I used to think the hardest part of that week was hearing Emma needed surgery. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing that while I sat beside her bed counting every breath, my husband had been somewhere else entirely, making choices that could reshape our whole lives. For a while I wanted an explanation, a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything that would let me feel foolish for doubting him. Because the alternative meant accepting that the person I trusted with my daughter's future had made a choice that put her at risk, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. That I didn't confront him right away. A few years earlier I would have. I'd never been someone who let a problem sit, but this wasn't an argument about money. This was my daughter. So I did what the army had trained into me. I slowed down, gathered facts, built a timeline instead of a reaction. Bank statements, transaction records, loan paperwork, all of it printed and spread across the hospital room while Emma slept beside me. The money hadn't vanished overnight. There were transfers going back weeks, small at first, then larger, as if someone believed he could move it slowly enough that no one would notice. I noticed. Just not soon enough. The next morning I called the bank, standing near the window while normal people crossed the parking lot with their coffee and their backpacks, living days that hadn't been blown open. When the representative finally came on the line, she confirmed unusual activity connected to a real estate transaction and gave me the address. Not an investment property. A beach house, the kind of place someone buys because they want a different life. I looked back at Emma, 2 years old, in need of medical care, and her father had bought himself somewhere to escape to. I thanked the woman on the phone, hung up, and stood there for several minutes without crying and without screaming. Some of the worst moments in life aren't loud at all. When Mark walked in that afternoon carrying a coffee and his usual unbothered calm, I was waiting. How's Emma? She's scared. Doctors said the procedure's going to be okay. That's not what I asked. I slid the property document across the table. His face changed, not dramatically but enough. He knew exactly what I'd found. Explain this. He didn't touch the paper. Rebecca. No. My voice surprised even me. Not loud, not angry, just locked in place. Explain. He sat down heavily. I was going to tell you. When? After Emma's surgery? After the money was gone? After you'd already moved into a beach house? It's not like that. Then tell me what it's like. It was an investment. Our emergency savings? I had a plan. Our daughter's medical money? His jaw tightened. You're making this sound worse than it is. That sentence stuck with me because I realized in that moment we weren't even having the same conversation. I was talking about our daughter. He was talking about himself. Rebecca, that house was supposed to secure our future. He pushed on. Our future? Mark, our daughter needs a heart procedure. I know. We needed that money. I know. Then how could you do this? He didn't answer right away, and somehow the silence hurt worse than any argument would have. Finally. Because I knew we'd figure it out. Figure it out? You mean I would figure it out? That's not fair. Fair. I had spent years supporting his career, running our home, managing Emma alongside my own responsibilities, and now with everything collapsing he was the one accusing me of being unfair. That night, once Mark had gone, I called my sister. I hadn't wanted to, my instinct is always to handle things alone, carry the weight and keep moving, but hearing myself say it out loud made something clear. I couldn't do this by myself. Mark used our savings, I told her. He bought a house. A beach house. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then quietly, Rebecca. While Emma's in the hospital? Yes. Are you sure? I understood the question. I wanted it to be unbelievable too. I have the documents. That was the first time I said it to another person, not just the facts but the reality underneath them. My husband had chosen something else over our daughter. Claire stayed on the phone with me for almost an hour. And she didn't offer comfort I didn't need or advice I wasn't ready for. She just said, "You need to stop protecting everyone except yourself and Emma." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I already knew she was right. The next morning Harold, Mark's father, showed up at the hospital room door. I hadn't seen him since Emma was admitted, and something in his face had changed. Serious. Tired, like he was carrying something heavy. I heard about the surgery, he said, looking at Emma first, then at me. The doctors need money before they can schedule it. I know. He reached into his coat and pressed an envelope into my hand. $5,500. I can't take this. It was the first time in days I let myself stop being strong, because his words weren't a strategy or an excuse, they were simply what someone should have done. For the first time since the nightmare started, I felt like someone was standing beside me. Emma's surgery was scheduled. The immediate crisis finally in motion. But sitting there that night with the payment confirmation in my hands, I understood that saving her was only the first fight. The question was no longer where did the money go, I already knew. The question was how long had Mark been hiding this from me. Harold called later that evening, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Rebecca. There's something you need to know about Mark. This isn't the first time he's done something like this. A breath. Years ago, he manipulated someone in our family financially. The room felt colder. I think what he did this time might not just be wrong, Rebecca. I think it might be criminal. The money wasn't the only thing Mark had taken. He'd taken the truth too. For a long time I thought the hardest moment would be the day I discovered what he'd done. I was wrong. The hardest moment was realizing that even after the truth was in front of me, I still had to fight. Betrayal doesn't end the day you find it. Sometimes that's when the real battle starts. Emma's surgery went well. I remember sitting in that waiting room watching the clock move slower than any clock has a right to move, imagining every version of the worst outcome, until the surgeon finally walked over with a calm face and said the procedure had gone well, and I covered my mouth not to keep from crying but to keep myself together, and let my body release a tension I hadn't realized I was holding. Emma was okay. That night, watching her sleep, one thought kept circling back. The surgery had saved my daughter, but it had also cracked my marriage wide open, and I couldn't unsee what was sitting right in front of me. Once Emma was home, I stopped hunting for explanations and started building a case. There's a difference. Before, I was a wife trying to understand her husband. Now I was a mother protecting her daughter. And the same instincts that had carried me through the army, organization, documentation, attention to detail, moved straight into my personal life. I built folders, saved emails, printed statements, wrote down dates. Not because I wanted a fight, but because I'd learned memory can be argued with. Facts can't. Mark noticed, of course, people used to controlling a room tend to notice the second they lose it. One evening he found me at the kitchen table surrounded by paper. "What are you doing?" "Reviewing our finances." "Rebecca, are you seriously still doing this? Emma's home, the surgery's over. Why can't we just move forward?" Move forward. As if the problem were behind us instead of sitting on the table between us. Move forward to what, Mark? To fixing our marriage. Do you understand that fixing a marriage requires honesty? I made a mistake. No. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. What you did required decisions. He didn't answer, and the silence told me more than words would have. A week later, I sat across from a family law attorney named Susan Whitaker. I wasn't there for revenge. I wanted to understand my options, how to protect Emma and myself. She listened without reacting, took notes, asked precise questions. When did the unusual activity start? When did he buy the property? Who had account access? What had I actually authorized? Each answer was another piece fitting into place. Then she went quiet over one of the documents. "Rebecca, some of these signatures don't look consistent." "What do you mean?" "I want a professional to examine them." "You think they were forged?" "I think we need answers before we make assumptions." I respected that about her. She didn't leap, she followed the evidence. 2 weeks later the forensic examiner's report came back, and I sat in my car outside the law office for several minutes before I could open it. Multiple inconsistencies. Signatures showing signs of being copied. Documents that appeared altered. Authorizations I had no memory of ever giving. I read it twice, trying to understand how someone I shared a home with could build an entire financial life I knew nothing about. The question that hurt wasn't how did he do it? It was how long. Once Mark realized I'd hired an attorney, the calm confidence disappeared. He started calling constantly, showing up places, pushing for conversations he'd refused to have when it mattered. One evening he came to the house while Emma played in the next room. "Rebecca, we need to talk." "Really talk?" I stayed quiet. He stepped closer. "I don't want lawyers involved." "You didn't want lawyers involved when you were making decisions without me either." "I told you I was trying to help our family." "Our family needed a hospital payment, Mark." "I made a choice." "Yes, you did." For once, he had nothing to say back. A few days later I learned he'd been telling a different version of events, that he was the husband trying to build a better future, and I was the wife who'd gone cold, who cared more about my career than my family, who was punishing him. It stung, not because I believed a word of it, but because I couldn't understand how someone could rewrite reality that completely. Then I remembered something steadying. The truth doesn't stop being true because someone tells a better story. The documents still existed. The action still happened, and I kept building the case with Susan. Every transaction, every email, every conversation laid out and dated. It was exhausting, but I'd changed. Months earlier I'd been the woman trying to save a marriage. Now I was the woman trying to keep her daughter from growing up believing this was normal. I stopped asking how to make Mark understand and started asking how to keep Emma safe. That shift changed everything. One evening Susan called. Her voice tight. "Rebecca, I need you to come in tomorrow. We found something. Additional accounts, more than one. Mark has been preparing for the possibility that you might leave," she said. "He built a financial structure that would have made it extremely difficult for you to access money without him." My own home suddenly felt unfamiliar. Then, "There's one more thing. We received a recording today of Mark saying something that directly contradicts everything he's told everyone." I stared at the documents on the table, and for the first time in months, I knew the truth finally had a voice, and Mark had recorded it himself. For months I thought the moment I wanted most was the day he'd be exposed. I imagined him having to answer for every choice, everyone finally seeing what I'd been saying all along. But when the day actually came, I understood something different. Justice feels different once you've already survived the hardest fight of your life. By then I wasn't fighting because I wanted Mark to lose. I was fighting because I wanted Emma to win. The final hearing had none of the noise our arguments at home used to have. No shouting, no accusations, just documents, dates, records, evidence laid out one at a time, and somehow that made it more powerful than any argument could have been. For months Mark had tried to sell a simpler story. A marriage that fell apart, one mistake, an overreacting wife. But the pattern in front of everyone told a different truth. Hidden accounts, unauthorized transfers, altered documents. This wasn't one bad decision. It was a series of them. Before it started, Susan asked if I was okay. A year earlier I would have said, "I'm fine," on reflex. The army had trained that phrase into me. Instead I thought about it and said, "I'm ready." Ready didn't mean I wasn't afraid. It meant fear wasn't running the room anymore. When Mark walked in, I looked at him differently, not with anger, not even sadness. Just clarity. I'd spent so long trying to understand the man I married, searching for reasons for the person I thought he was. Sitting there, I finally accepted something. Sometimes the person you miss was never entirely real. Sometimes you're grieving an idea instead of a man. Susan didn't attack him. She didn't need to. She simply laid out what happened, one transaction at a time, until there was nowhere left for the truth to hide. The judge reviewed everything, looked at Mark, and the room went completely silent except for the sound of paper moving. And somehow those papers carried the weight of everything we'd been through. The ruling gave Emma stability and named the deception for what it was. Mark didn't lose because I destroyed him. He lost because the truth was stronger than the story he'd built. His choices brought him to that room. Not me. Afterward, Harold was waiting outside, looking older than before. Not physically, something deeper. "Rebecca," he said, then looked at the ground. "I'm sorry. Not for what you did. Because I should have seen it sooner. I defended him when I should have questioned him." It meant more than he probably knew, because one of the hardest parts of all of this had been feeling like no one believed me. Harold didn't explain Mark away. He accepted the truth, and sometimes that's the first real step toward healing. Linda, Mark's mother, took longer. She defended him, believed his version, decided I was somehow the cause of it all. But eventually even she couldn't argue with what the consequences made plain. You can excuse someone for a while. Eventually the truth arrives whether you're ready for it or not. The months after were strange in a way I hadn't expected. People assume the hardest part is the moment something breaks. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's the rebuilding afterward, learning who you are without the thing you spent years trying to hold together. I'd poured so much energy into keeping the family, the home, the image of us intact that I'd forgotten something simple. I was part of that family too. My needs mattered. My voice mattered. My safety mattered. Emma recovered better than I'd let myself hope. I remember a random afternoon a few months later at the playground. Nothing special, the kind of ordinary I used to take for granted. Emma running, laughing, chasing bubbles, no machines, no paperwork, no fear. She looked back at me and smiled, and I understood something clearly for the first time. The beach house was never the real loss. The money wasn't even the deepest betrayal. The real danger had been letting Emma grow up believing love means accepting anything. That family means staying silent. That sacrifice means disappearing. I wasn't going to let that happen. People sometimes ask if I regret the years I spent with Mark. I understand the question, but I don't see it that way anymore. Erase those years and I erase Emma, and I would never erase her. The painful parts are still mine. They taught me something I needed. Loyalty matters, commitment matters, but loyalty should never require abandoning yourself. The hardest battle I ever fought wasn't in my military career. It wasn't a mission or an emergency deployment. It was sitting in my own home, learning I had to protect my daughter from someone I loved. I'd spent years preparing for threats. I never expected one to come from inside my own marriage. But I learned something else too. Strength isn't always staying. Sometimes strength is leaving. Sometimes it's admitting the life you planned is no longer the life you should keep living. These days when I look at Emma, I don't think about the money or the beach house or Mark's choices. I think about a little girl who fought through something she was too young to understand. I think about the people who showed up when I needed them. I think about the woman who sat beside that hospital bed, terrified and still fighting, and I wish I could go back and tell her, "You are not failing because someone else failed you. You are not losing your family by choosing the truth. You are protecting the family that actually matters." That I used to believe love was proven by how much pain you could endure. I know better now. Love is proven by the choices people make when someone vulnerable is depending on them. Anyone can say they love you. Anyone can promise a future. But when the moment comes, when someone needs you most, that's when the truth shows itself. And if a person can look at their own child's greatest need and choose something else instead, the question stops being what did they buy? The real question is, what else were they willing to sacrifice that you haven't discovered yet?